Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Cosmic Connection. My name's Amanda Poole Walsh. I'm the founder of Astrology Hub, and I am here with Rick Merlin Levine. And today, our topic is astrology and reincarnation. So, I think it's been 2 or 3 weeks where Rick has requested this topic. And today he said, I still have a hankering to talk about astrology and reincarnation. It's like, let's do it. So here we are.
I did say that. I'd like to start off saying that this is the first week in about 2 or 3 weeks where I'm not beginning by apologizing for something I said the week before. So I don't know whether that's a good sign or whether it's a sign of my total indifference and time to move on.
I'd say we're making progress.
But yes, reincarnation. Actually, I have to admit that I am altering a few words that I speak. Many years ago, I read that Buckminster Fuller said that we can't change our minds until we change our languaging. And he said, in particular, we talk about the sunrise and the sunset, and the sun doesn't rise and the sun doesn't set. That's a leftover from when we thought the earth was still and in the middle of it all, and the sun actually rose and the sun set. The fact of the matter is that the earth spins around and the sun comes into sight, and then the earth spins around and the earth's surface eclipses the sun as it looks like it sets. And so he suggested that we needed to change our languaging to sunsight and sunclipse to replace sunrise and sunset. So as much as I don't think anyone has really replaced those words, I've been looking at changing my casual use of the words birth and death, because like sunrise and sunset, they don't actually describe the event as it appears to be occurring. I am basically replacing the word birth with reincarnation or incarnation. And death will be replaced by the word dis-incarnation. You see, what we call reincarnation, and we use that word flippantly to describe, I think, something that has been in most of our traditions, spiritual traditions, certainly tied into the Vedic or Hindu tradition, where the goal of this spiritual pursuit in this lifetime is to work towards getting off the wheel of reincarnation. But you see, you can't have reincarnation until you have disincarnation. So this is the problem with just talking about reincarnation, because it's a process of disincarnation, reincarnation, disincarnation, reincarnation. And so that's kind of where I'd like to jump into this. This is something I've been thinking about a lot for most of my adult life. I have to say that in the past, maybe 10 or 15 years, due to a number of personal experiences and associations with traditions and people who are much closer to, how do I want to describe this? Much closer to the veil that seems to drop between this world and other worlds, or this lifetime and other lifetimes, and my own personal experiences. And maybe some of this has to do with the natural process of aging, because aging, whether you like it or not, is basically creeping up upon disincarnation. That's the deal. When we're born, we're much closer to birth or incarnation. And as we move into our 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s, we edge closer and closer to that inevitable act of disincarnation. And whenever I talk about this subject or think about it, I'm always reminded of, at least in our culture, our total denial or avoidance of talking about death. It's easy to talk about reincarnation as long as we don't have to talk about death, but you can't have reincarnation unless you have disincarnation. Anyhow, Ram Dass used to say that this is in reference to how much in denial we are about death here in the West. He used to say that the great American death mantra was, "Oh shit."
Oh man, that's perfect.
Anyhow, that's my opening volley.
Okay.
Reincarnation and disincarnation.
Okay. Well, I actually like the way the Hawaiians say well, actually, I don't know if all of them do, but a kahuna that I studied with for a while, she would call it changing address, which I love.
Yeah.
She's like, he changed address, she changed address. It takes all the angst out. I also like graduation, but whether or not we actually, well, yeah, I like graduation too. And
I think it's tough to know whether it's a graduation or whether we just get recycled for another round of remedial work at the same level. Because graduation implies going up one. We're going somewhere, but who knows where we reincarnate. But go ahead. You were going to say something. Right?
So is reincarnation, or the idea of reincarnation and disincarnation, inherent in the study of astrology? Or is there a way to understand astrology without that belief system tied to it?
I hate you because you always ask these questions that have nothing to do with what I think I was going to say, and then they make me think. And then the truth of that is I don't know. I guess I do believe that one can practice astrology without having any belief in or of reincarnation. I also believe that one can practice astrology without having any spiritual inclination. I find that personally alien to me, but I mean, but astrology can be used as a tool for working in the stock market. And there are people who I know who are damn good astrologers, and that's what they use it for. And does it mean that they have any sense or interest in spiritual pursuit and or in reincarnation? And I would say on some level, it doesn't matter. It doesn't require one to have those beliefs in order to see that astrology is something that actually does have efficacy, and it does work. Now, having said that, I think that the study of astrology for many people is a very deep rabbit hole that once you fall down, you realize that you're buying into, or you're at least entertaining a much wider perspective on things that you had ever anticipated prior to that. I mean, it's one thing saying, yeah, I went to a party and I met this guy and he's a Gemini and I don't date Geminis, or I met this woman and she's a Scorpio and I don't, whatever. That's very different than pursuing a spiritual tradition that is ancient, mystical, and has the concept of reincarnation tied up into it.
My first reading with Natasha Alter, I had gone to 13.
Wait a minute. Hi, Natasha.
I had been to 13 years of Catholic school. Yeah. I had studied world religions in college. I was like, I really wanted to understand. And it was that first astrology reading that was my most clear evidence of God. And I remember just sitting there in her kitchen, going with tears streaming down my face, going, oh my gosh, there is a divine intelligence that is so much bigger than I could ever comprehend. If you can look at this little circle with some squiggles on it and know everything about my soul, like, it was just completely mind-blowing. And like I said, the first evidence of God that I had like a tangible experience of.
Right, but you were in the hands of someone who had a spiritual inclination
Very
and look
much.
at the chart that way, rather than looking at the chart and doing a mechanistic, you have Mercury in Leo and therefore you talk loudly, and you have Venus in Gemini and therefore you can't settle on one partner, and you have, whatever, it's a very different orientation than having someone who has a sense of spiritual inclusion that certainly does. I think I agree with you. I think it is difficult to entertain not the mechanistic side of astrology, but the conceptual framework of astrology without having to come to the conclusion that the universe and the cosmos, I'm not sure exactly what the difference is, but that the cosmos, in fact, are intelligent, or that the cosmos singular is intelligent, and that whatever you want to call it, gods, goddesses, Mother Nature, I don't care what label you put on it, that there is something there that is some sort of conceptual glue that holds it all together, that we get little fragments of through whatever religion we happen to be brought up within.
Mm-hmm.
I would agree with that.
Okay, so now I'm really curious. What direction did you think we were going to go? And let's just go there.
Well, okay. So my goal today is not to teach how to look at a chart and see what someone's past lives were at all. That's just not within what I'm thinking about at all today. What I'm thinking about is, what the hell are past lives? Do they exist? And how does it fit in to what we see in astrology and what we practice or what we study as astrologers? That's my orientation here. And I would start this with a little bit of a discussion about the planet Saturn. You see, because Saturn is, to the ancients, Saturn was the absolute gateway between this world and other worlds. When the ancients looked at the night sky, they saw fixed stars that, for all practical purposes, did not move. They were They were They were stationary. They were stuck. They were stable. They were stuck. Okay. Then they saw all these things up there that moved, and they called these things wanderers. The Greek word for wanderer is planeta. So planets are just wanderers. And they were the things up there that were still in the celestial domain, but they wandered. And what the ancients noticed was that the slowest of the wanderers was Saturn. You see, Saturn, the symbol for Saturn is a backwards ST. In fact, what I would like to do here is to quickly share my screen for just a moment. And let me just clear this so I don't have all my garbage on my screen, and then do this. And here we go. And I suppose if I really knew we were doing this, I would have had this all ready to go earlier. But okay, here we go. Share screen. And okay. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes. So for those of you listening on the podcast, just a reminder, all of these episodes are on YouTube and also in video format on our website, astrologyhub.com. So if you want to see the visual that goes with this, you need to head on over to those videos.
Perfect. And we won't spend too much time on visuals for all of those people. But what we're looking at here is a picture of the ringed planet Saturn. And we're looking at the symbol of Saturn next to it. And what I want to do is I want to, for a moment, talk about this symbol, which actually predates the modern languages that we speak. That that it used to be that there were symbols that when they were turned into linear alphabets, Aramaic and Greek, and then the Indo-European, Latin, Romantic languages, that the symbol for Saturn looked like this, what I call a T with a backwards S. And the thing is that the T part of the Saturn represents a symbol for the cross of the material universe. This symbol is built into everything. It is the symbol of the Catholic religion, of the Christian religions, because the Christian religions and Catholicism in particular was a religion based upon the material world. We are stuck in this world, and the divine proportion is only knowable to God and priests as an intermediary between the physical world and the divine proportions, or the divine world. And in fact, we can also just say that in some way that this cross becomes the cross that we all bear in life, because the 90-degree angle in physics creates material reality. Now, I don't want to I mean, that we could use this for an entire topic sometime in the future, but the fact of the matter is that in astrology, astrologers use the 90-degree angle. And when I say 90 degrees, I mean every 90 degrees. 90 degrees, 180 degrees. So if you look at this, you got 90 degrees, 180 degrees, then the next 90 degrees is 270, and then the next 90 is back to 360 or 0. So that 90-degree angle creates the cross. And this cross in astrology is called the cardinal cross. In fact, the cardinal signs are the signs that are points on this cross. Aries would be here off to the left. That would be starting spring. Cancer down here at the bottom, starting summer in the Northern Hemisphere. Libra here off to the right, starting autumn in the Northern Hemisphere. And Capricorn up here at the top. And so this cardinal cross represents the cross of the real world. In fact, it's the same cardinal cross that we use when we make a map and we create north, south, east, and west. It's the cross of the material world. And 90-degree angles in astrology, whether they're conjunctions, squares, oppositions, or squares on the other side, that's where the action happens. That's where events happen. That's where people get married, where they die, where they or disincarnate, where they change jobs, where events happen is at the 90-degree angle. So that's the first part of the symbol. The second part of the symbol is a what looks like a backwards S, but it represents the moon, because the moon is two half cycles, a waxing and waning crescent moon. And so in a way, this part of the Saturn cycle represents that which is always in flux. The moon, the tides are never still, except for a few minutes when they change directions. They have to, in effect, cross that 0 point where it moves from one way to the other way, where the tide moves from ebb to flow or the other way. But in fact, we have this symbol for constant change, sometimes called the sine wave, that represents change. And here's the deal, is that the symbol of Saturn is actually that which changes nailed to that which doesn't change. And that's the magic and the power of Saturn. Saturn holds the stability. It is the static. It is the that which is like stasis. It's that the status quo even. Now, if you noticed all the words that I just said, status, status quo, stasis, all of these words have ST in it. And here's where it gets a little bit crazy. And we're not going to spend much more time here, but we have to understand Saturn if we're going to think we can understand reincarnation. So the symbol for Saturn is actually a backwards ST. And in fact, as that symbol became language, it's crazy, but the ST still represents Saturn. And here's a short list. And for those who are not on video, this includes the words structure, status, strong, strange, strict, statute, state, crystallization, constriction, construction, astringent, existent. Can you see how all these ST words are basically about energy pulling in and becoming austere, constriction, substance, and so on. And in fact, even when we make a list and we give things structure, the list has a first and a last. And in fact, we use the ST symbol because remember, Saturn was the outward limit. You couldn't go any further than Saturn and still be alive because once you went past Saturn, everything was fixed. And so we have a form in our English language that is, we just stick a Saturn symbol on the end of a word and we make it the limit. So big, bigger, biggest, happy, happier, happiest, many more, most. The st is the limit. And Saturn, in fact, is the same word as Satan etymologically. And here we just need to understand that Saturn is not bad. And I remind listeners or viewers who have never read Liz Green's seminal book that was written, I think probably back in the mid-70s, called Saturn, A New Look at the Old Devil. Now, it's interesting that she uses the word devil because Saturn was considered to be satanic. Saturn was the Grim Reaper. Saturn was the end of the road. Saturn was you got what you deserved. We were born of original sin, so we all deserve shit. Go to hell. Bye, done. So this is why Saturn gets a bad rap. But coming the other way, if you were just light energy and fell through the gates of Saturn, that's what Lucifer was. Lucifer, a fallen angel, like Satan, simply was that which fell through the realms from the magical outer realm and into this world. I want to close this, and then I'm going to come back off the slides, is with a quote from Liz Green, and Liz wrote, "Pluto is Saturn's only real friend. Although, as the saying goes, with a friend such as this, one has no need of enemies." Saturn is the gatekeeper. To the Greeks, when the soul was born, the soul came in through the gate of Saturn. And then it progressed downward through Jupiter and Mars and each of the planets until through the moon, and then boom, here on Earth, baby. At death, the progression was exactly the other way. That at death, the soul would leave the body and then move through the planetary spheres until, moving through the gate of Saturn, it was no longer of this realm. So Saturn was the end of the road. That was Saturn's job. Saturn was the absolute delimiter between here and there. And in fact, I would like to suggest that although Saturn was once the end of the road, with the discovery of Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and all these other things out beyond the realm of Saturn, Saturn, instead of being a period, the end, became a comma or a semicolon, because this is the larger shift that with the discovery of things that we couldn't see, that we couldn't perceive, Saturn was sensible, experienced through our senses. The material world is. But as we began to move into these extrasensorial realms of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, where without the aid of technology, we had no way of perceiving that we began to realize that there were other realms. And interestingly enough, it was in the late 1800s at the alignment, the once every 500-year alignment of Neptune, the planet of spirituality, and Pluto, the lord of the hell realms, that at that alignment was when Freud wrote The Interpretation of Dreams, that launched the whole concept of depth psychology and a relationship between that which is not here on the surface and that which is here on the surface, the physicality. So in order to understand reincarnation, we really need to understand a little bit about Saturn, and in particular Pluto, although all of the trans-Saturnian planets all feed into this. And you see, Pluto is the phoenix, The phoenix is the mythical bird that is born from an egg that's baked in the fires. And so the phoenix arises from the ashes of the ruins of destruction. Keywords here: ashes, ruin, destruction. However, the bird that arises from that destruction is in fact a magical entity. And as such, Pluto represents the process of reincarnation through that which life cannot it cannot endure. So that you have you have something that ends life, or that is an event. Let's say we're here on the 75th bombing of Hiroshima, I think today or yesterday, and these are events that basically create death. The bombing of the World Trade Tower more recently, certainly even the explosions in Beirut just yesterday. But when there's that type of an ending to something, Pluto says, unlike Saturn says this is the end of the road. Pluto says, no, when the road ends, that's really just the beginning of a deeper transformation. This is what Pluto's job is. Pluto is the metamorphosis that occurs between the end of the caterpillar and the beginning of the butterfly. Something happens where things they lose form in this realm, and they go into a realm where there is no apparent form, but then they reconnect, and somehow out of the black, gooey ectoplasm, protoplasm of the dead caterpillar and not yet born butterfly, somehow this all comes back together and magically creates what's around for the next level of incarnation. So Pluto is certainly about this whole concept of metamorphosis and change. And Pluto only came into astrology really in the within the past 100 years, less than that, because it was only discovered in the 1930s. And it really wasn't until the 1960s, maybe even early 70s, when Jeff Green wrote a book called Pluto, The Evolutionary Journey of the Soul, that people began to really understand how Pluto, not Saturn, was the gateway for anything coming in, that things had to come through Pluto before they got to Saturn. And so this, in some ways, created an entire school of astrology, which we now call evolutionary astrology, which uses the nodes of the moon and Pluto in particular to understand this incarnation as a process in a larger scenario where Pluto, not Saturn, is the gateway for the soul's entry into this lifetime. And so this whole, what I'm trying to do here is paint a picture that really shows how new all of this is, that reincarnation has not been a subject tied to astrology until very recently. And we'll get even a step further into that in just a moment. But here's another piece of Pluto that, Pluto is the lord of the hell realms. In the Judeo-Christian, more in the Christian tradition, but in the Western Judeo-Christian tradition, hell is not a nice place. Hell is a place where we go to get punished. It's eternal damnation. And yet in the Eastern traditions, it's not at death, it's not just a simple bifurcation of heaven or hell, and most of us go to hell because very few people deserve going to heaven, reserved for saints, if you will. But in the Eastern traditions, there are many levels of what we would call the hell realms, hell only being one of many levels. And so there was a 18th century, 18th century, 18th century minister named Emanuel Swedenborg, who Actually, the Swedenborgian Church is still alive and well. And Swedenborg wrote a very famous book called Heaven and Hell. He was a fire and brimstone, I think, kind of like a Calvinist, if you will. But he spent his life living in a three-dimensional world, but interacting and talking with angels all the time. And his book, Heaven and Hell, had a very simple concept to it. And that was, if you live a human life, you will go to hell. But if you live a divine life and really, kind of do all the right things, then you have a chance of going to heaven, heaven and hell. William Blake came along and wrote a piece called The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, where he basically took Swedenborg down and said heaven and hell were merely two opposites of a coin, and that you don't get one without the other. And I could talk a long time for Blake about Blake's book, The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. But in it, amongst other things, Blake said, hell is a place so beautiful that would torment an angel to insanity. Hell is a place so beautiful that it would torment an angel to insanity. And basically this gets to the concept, the modern psychological concept of the hell realms being the unconscious. And we fear the hell realms, we fear the unconscious, but as Joseph Campbell said, the cave we fear the most is the one that holds the greatest treasures. And that there's a wonderful book by James Hillman, who is I guess he's considered to be the torchbearer of Jungian psychology. But what Hillman did was he took it into a realm that's now called transpersonal psychology, which some people have also taken it into what's called liberation psychology, but transpersonal psychology. And James Hillman wrote a book called The Dream and the Underworld, which is the best book I've ever read about Pluto, even though he doesn't mention Pluto, even though Hillman was a competent astrologer. It's a book about hell. It's a book about the underworld and about the magic and the transformations that occur on those levels of reality that we can't perceive with our aware and conscious mind. So this is why evolutionary astrologers use Pluto so strongly in their understanding of the cycle of reincarnation. Now, having laid that groundwork, I want to now take a first heretical step into the concept of reincarnation. Every religious tradition in the modern world has a mystical tradition associated with it, whether it's the Kabbalah in the Jewish tradition, whether it's the Catholic mystics, whether it's the Hindu tradition. They all have mystical traditions tied into them. And all of them agree with modern science on this next point I'm going to state. And that is that linear time, as we know it, is not a function of the universe. It's a function of the reptile brain, what we call it's the amygdala, or the medulla oblongata. Oh my God, where did I pull that out of? Obviously out of my reptile brain, or some other part of my anatomy that I don't want to talk about. Anyhow, the concept of cause and effect and of linear time is a function of our brain, because it needs that in order to survive. The ego needs to stay alive. However, the mystical traditions all agree that in the divine proportion, meaning not here on earth, that everything that ever happened, everything that ever will happen, is happening right now. This is it's a ubiquitous concept. The Buddhists refer to this as the theory of instantaneous time and space. In other words, everything is in this moment. Everything in the universe that ever has occurred or ever will occur is occurring in this exact moment. We just don't perceive it that way unless we're in some sort of state of enlightenment, or unless we've done mass doses of some sort of plant chemistry that I'm not advertising here, but I am mentioning that it's a piece of this whole moving into these other realms. So this brings up an interesting problem. And the problem it brings up is reincarnation. Most people, not all, there are some incredibly wise and competent people that I have the pleasure of knowing that not only understand this, but use this in their work. The problem with most people that delve into reincarnation, they believe that there's linearity. I was this, then I was that, then I was this, now I'm this, and if I'm good, then I will be that. There's this implied linear timeline. And I would like to suggest, and please don't read me wrong, and I don't want any of the listeners or viewers to read me wrong. It's not that I do not, this is a double negative. It's not that I do not believe in reincarnation. I absolutely believe that, well, I shouldn't even say I believe. I know that the soul, or let me say it more correctly. I know that something survives death. There's just, I mean, not only my personal experiences, but my observations of others, my interaction with people who are very much in touch with and in tune with the role of either being a medium or a psychic medium or an in-between. There's no question in my mind, and there's really once you begin to dig on this and look at and do some research, it's hard to maintain a position that there aren't beings, that there aren't awarenesses, that there aren't life forms that do not have a body. And what I've actually, one of my lectures that I've done on this topic, I've called consciousness con carne. Because like chili con carne, which is just chili with meat, all we are is consciousness con carne. It's an illusion to think that consciousness requires meat to be conscious. It just so happens that we think it does because we are meat. We have meat bodies and we're conscious. So we assume that consciousness requires meat to be conscious. And it doesn't. Again, I think of an old Ram Dass story. I was actually attended a weekend workshop of his decades ago. And he said, so how many people in this room think that they don't have biases? And of course, it was filled with a bunch of, ex-hippies, and everyone said, I don't have any biases. I'm cool. And he goes, well, what would you do if I told you that one of my best friends doesn't have a body? And he said, and he went on to tell the story of his relationship with this entity that referred to itself as Emmanuel. And Emmanuel was a constant friend or being in Ram Dass's life that was channeled by different people at different times, but there was a similarity to the energy, and Emmanuel obviously did fine, without having a body. And Ram Dass says, one day I was in a conversation through a medium friend, in a conversation with Emmanuel, and I said, so Emmanuel, if you had one and only one thing that you'd want to tell me, that you'd want me to know about death, what would it be? And Ram Dass said, Emmanuel replied to me after a little bit of thought, and he said, Ram Dass, if there was one and only one thing that I would want you to know about death, it would be this. It's perfectly safe. All right. So I am not questioning the concept of dis-incarnation or reincarnation. I am, however, questioning how it all flows and what our perception of it is and how it actually works. In order to take the next step in this little discussion, I'm going to have to come in with something from right field, or left field, I guess, whatever the one where people don't hit to, left field. And that is a book that has been around and part of a tradition of a culture that probably knows more about the states between death and rebirth than any other culture on the planet. That would be the Tibetan Buddhists, and the book would be the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Most people do not know that this book. Most people who know it don't really understand it. Um, I first came across this book as a college student in my psychedelic days, because I came across a book that was written by three Harvard psychologists, actually three ex-Harvard psychologists. And these psychologists were, in fact, Tim Leary, Ralph Metzner, and Richard Alpert. Tim Leary doesn't need an introduction. Ralph Metzner went on to establish the Green Earth Foundation and was a faculty member at the California Institute of Integral Studies until his disincarnation a couple years ago. And Richard Alpert went to India and found a master, changed his name to Ram Dass. And these three Harvard psychologists wrote a book called, and this was in 1964, I think. It might have been 63, but I think it was 64. They wrote a book called The Psychedelic Experience, and the subtitle of the book was A User's Manual Based Upon the Tibetan Book of the Dead. What? Huh? And what these psychologists realized was that when one ingested a powerful psychedelic substance, that one went into a state that was no longer controlled by the ego, which runs this three-dimensional operation here from our individual perspective, and went into a realm that was very much akin to what was described by the Tibetan Book of the Dead as the states of existence between death and rebirth. And we could delve into this one really deeply too. We're not going to right now. We don't have the time. But the fact is that these realms are the same realms that were discovered by Sigmund Freud when he discovered the third stage of these, what the Tibetans called the Bardo, B-A-R-D-O, the Bardo states. And the third stage of the Bardo states was the psychosexual, or the rebirth, the jealousy, the compression. And that's where Freud basically worked his way back into. And then Jung discovered or pushed that further and found himself in what the Tibetans call the second Bardo, which is the dream state of things that exist, but every thought becomes reality. And this is the collective unconscious. This is the archetypal realms. This is the realm where shamans go there and back into these. It's the dream state. In a dream, it doesn't matter if it's true or not true. Any thought, bing, becomes reality in that moment. And in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, these are basically states of existence between death and rebirth. So the reason why this is all so important is that since the advent of depth psychology, as a culture, we've been poking into these realms in a way that we never had prior. And it wasn't until 1952 or 52, I think it was, that a hypnotist, it was in November of 1952, that a hypnotist who was not a psychologist in Pueblo, Colorado, hypnotized the subject because he had read that there were psychologists hypnotizing people and regressing them back into earlier parts of their life. And one was able to regress a person, and the person had memories of being in the womb. And this was like shocking and breakthrough. And he had a subject that he had worked with. And on the night of November 29th, 1952, after a dinner gathering at someone's home, he hypnotized this woman and regressed her back to her childhood, and then further, and then further. And all of a sudden, she began speaking in a thick Irish brogue and identified herself as Friday. And it turns out, after many regressions, that was a 2-year-old version of this character that came through in this hypnotic state that was later identified as Bridey, B-R-I-D-E-Y, Bridey Murphy. And Maury Bernstein, the hypnotist, eventually retired, spent some time and went to Ireland and discovered in church records that there was in fact a Bridie Murphy around the time period that this person should have existed in the early 1800s, and went to her old home, which was still standing and everything matched descriptions and blah, 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 blah. Does this prove reincarnation? No, but it's the first recorded hypnotic reincarnation, past life regression. We moderners don't get that there was no such thing as past life regression in more than 70 years ago, or even less than that. That there are traditions that bring this right into their tradition. I mean, in Bali, for example, there are people that the veil between this life and other lives, people remember their most recent incarnation, including the village and the people's names, and they've never been to the village. And certainly in most indigenous cultures, there is a presence of the past through the wisdom of the ancestors as they are reincarnated. Now, what does that mean, reincarnated? And here my view varies from a lot of people. I'm not trying to tell anyone that I'm right on this. I'm just saying here's a different way of thinking about it. Because if during a past life regression, this woman became Bridie Murphy, does that mean she was Bridie Murphy in that lifetime? Or does it mean that her being, her soul, resonated in such a way that the resonance was so similar to this other entity that that other entity, even though it lived a couple of hundred years prior, was actually part of her existence? And here's where it gets a little bit tricky, because if past life regression is such a thing that works, what about future life progression? Can future lives impact the present? And although this might be a surprise to some people, and you can Google in physics, you could Google physics and retrocausation. That's a good word, retrocausation. Retrocausation is how events in the future impact events in the present moment. And people ask me as an astrologer all the time, can you change the future with astrology? And I go, no, but you can certainly change the past. And people go, you can't change the past, it's written in stone. And I go, yeah, well, what'd you think about Thanksgiving when you grew up compared to what you think about it now? What did you think about religion when you grew up versus what you think about it now? What did you think about your parents or your siblings? Why do you go to therapy? You go to therapy to change the past, so you're not trapped by the lies that the past held. That's what therapy does. You change the past, it gives you more choices in the present, and therefore you can then alter your trajectory or the future by altering the past, which changes the present. Anyhow, what does all this have to do with reincarnation? Something's happening here. Some noise. I'm ignoring it. It'll go away. I'm going to turn my volume down for a second. You should still be able to hear me. Yeah. The concept of reincarnation to me works like a radio. And when we get to the end, I want to end with a poem. I know everyone loved my poem from last time. I have another poem that I call my reincarnation poem. It's not really just about reincarnation, but it really drives home this point that what we call reincarnation might actually be the bringing of consciousness from the past or from the future into the present moment by taking down the edges of our boundaries of what we normally think of as our limit. We think Saturn is the skin, so we think that our body ends here. Well, that's bullshit. We already know we can measure brain waves magnetically out here. There are certainly other things that have gone on and other scientific research that shows that there is something goes way out beyond the body, whether you want to call it your auric field or your, there's many ways of referring to it. And certainly Rupert Sheldrake's work in morphogenesis, the morphic field of energy around any living being. But it's my contention that, and here I'm going to relate this now back to astrology, is that when you look at an astrology chart, there is resonance, there is hum. We look at the planets as points, but planets are frequency events. They're always moving, and they are low frequency music that we can't hear with our ears because it's so low frequency. And yet all lives create these frequencies. And just because we don't have physicality anymore when we pass or graduate or drop our body or disincarnate, that doesn't change the vibration that was still there, that's still vibrating. And therefore, if I am a psychic medium, whether it's by training or by natural gift, I can take my radio and I can tune the dial and pick up on frequencies that maybe other people don't normally reach or don't normally get to. I would also suggest that even those people who do not believe in reincarnation, who do not believe in spirits or disincarnate beings, still can be impacted by them. You don't have to believe in gravity to drop a rock and have it land on your foot, you know? And you might say, oh, that rock landed on my foot. I don't know how it got there or why it's there, but my foot hurts. And I think that what happens is as we go through life, we're constantly being informed by, we might call it our intuition, we might call it a hunch, we might call it, some people refer to them as their spirit guides. And there are, because of, I mean, they certainly can be, because if we learn to differentiate them, I know many people who, when they get informed by what other people might call their intuition, they can say it was this guide or that guide or another guide rather than my guides are telling me. So I think that what's happened to us as a culture, as we've moved more and more into higher frequency vibrations, whether it's because of the use of media technology, radio communication, digital communication, computers, whether it's because of the instrumentation that we have that allows us to see realms of the universe that were previously invisible to our five senses, that we now have moved into a realm where the dividing line, back to Saturn, full circle, the dividing line between here and there is not nearly as precise or clean or absolute as it once was. And that is the opening volley for my take on reincarnation.
The opening volley. Oh my goodness. It's such a fun exploration. I mean, really, it's one of those things that I don't know that any of us could come to an absolute answer, but it is a very interesting inquiry. And I don't know about all of you, but I have definitely had those past life regression experiences. And what's interesting to think about, tying it into what you're saying, is whether or not that was me as the warrior on the battlefield that I remember, or that was me at a thing like a witch hunt kind of thing. Does it matter? Because whatever.
Let me also say, or whether or not there is a me that you think is a me.
Exactly.
In
Exactly.
other words, it's not making less of that or the experience. In fact, we have this illusion that I am Rick and you are Amanda.
And that we're
But
separate.
even that is an illusion.
Exactly.
It's not like we're saying, oh, that's not real, it's just an illusion. We're taking that to a much more radical place. We're saying, oh, you're not real and I'm not real. We're all illusions.
Right.
But the resonance creates a hum that reincarnates that energy that then becomes indistinguishable from me and everyone. I've certainly had more than my fair share of experiences, both of either guided, hypnotically induced, or natural states of reincarnational reverie or experience that have been incredibly powerful. And so, yeah, because I have this radical take on this, I just need to keep coming back to the fact that I'm not saying this doesn't exist at all. I'm just saying that we may have it framed slightly from an anthropomorphic, from an egocentric, from a point of view that just enables us to understand it without having to take a much deeper dive.
Well, even, okay, I'm going to go back to what I was saying. And yes, absolutely. And keep coming it back to the frame that you're like nudging us toward. But even reincarnation and disincarnation implies linear time. And there has to be a beginning and an end to that. Like we
No,
could be doing it
there
all at
has
the
to be a
same
beginning.
time.
There has to be a beginning and an ending to my body.
Right.
But who knows what or where, from whence the energy that is reincarnating, from what time period or
Right.
periods or multiple periods are actually coming into the moment.
Right.
There's no reason to think that when I reincarnate, it's the reincarnation of a single entity from a single point. There can be multiple entities from multiple points that are now basically doing their musical, symphonic, cacophonic dance within me.
Right. Well, what I am thinking though is that the question that we ask as we are entering into the past life regression could potentially pull in a memory or experience of ours or a cluster of consciousness, or it doesn't even matter, right? That helps us in the moment to heal the thing or face the thing or have an enlightenment around the thing that we have the question around.
Absolutely agreed. And again, I just want to circle back to one other point, because we think of, most of us astrologers, new agers, quasi new agers. I don't like that word. I don't even call myself a new ager, but whatever it is we are, most of us have either had personal experiences, know people have, or actually do it professionally, meaning that this whole idea of past life regression, whether it's hypnotically induced or induced through guides or through practices, this is a very recent thing. There was no such thing as guided, meditation for past life regression prior to the 1960s or 70s. It didn't exist. It was, again, the first documented case of a past life regression that was purposefully induced was Maury Bernstein, who wrote a book. The book is available. It's out of print, but I've found copies of it. The name of the book is called The Search for Bridie Murphy. It's his whole story. He wrote it, I don't know, I think probably in 1955 or 56, a few years after the actual series of reincarnation experiences. This is not something that has a long history. Certainly shamans and spiritual, teachers have been able to go in and pull out ancestral information. But this idea of going to someone and having a past life regression is basically a very, very, very modern thing. And that doesn't make it untrue, but it makes it begs the question of why now?
Right. Okay. I have a Saturn question.
Yeah, of course you do. Ms. Capricornus.
All right. Well, it was just a thought and a question. But you said that Saturn is that which changes, nailed to that which doesn't change, right?
I did.
Okay. And so that which changes would be the soul, correct? Nailed to that which doesn't change, the body. Yes? Is
I
that
would
what
say
it
I think it might be just the opposite. The body changes. The body is all physically, the body is born as an infant, the body grows, it changes. It has some pattern that it holds, but the actual body itself begins as a single or as a single cell, and then it decays. So the body is not a constant. The soul, on the other hand, may be something that energetically, like time, passes through the body. It's not the body passing through time. It's the soul passing through the body, perhaps.
Ah, interesting. I'd love to hear what everybody thinks about that.
Yeah, and again, how I responded to you was basically just my it's a good question, but I'm not sure. When I say that which changes to that which doesn't, I'm thinking more on a real Saturnian level. For example, we live in a world where we have a body, we have a structure, we have parents, and our feelings may change day to day. Our loved ones may change. Our marriage partner may come or go, or children arrive. These things change, but something within us doesn't change, even though we do have change. And the Saturn things are the constants that when you look at someone's Saturn transits, and I don't know whether we've ever talked about this here before, but with all of my apprentices and my regular ongoing students, I have everyone do a study of their life, of the Saturn transits to their sun, their moon, ascendant, and midheaven throughout their whole life. Because you begin to see that the events that occur when Saturn, let's say, conjuncts your sun, and then 7 years later squared it, and then 7.5 years later opposed it, and then 7.5 years later squared it again, and then 7.5 years later conjuncted it again. As you go through your life and you see these events, you begin to realize that they're all the same event. They're just from different perspectives in time. That at one event, your parents moved to a new city and you're in a situation that is totally alien and different. And then 7 years later, you're in a first relationship and it doesn't work out and your heart is broken. And then 7 years later, you get a job of your lifetime and you meet someone and you get married and have a kid. I mean, I'm making this scenario up, but everyone can take their chart and map these out, and you begin to see that something changes, but something does not. And Saturn is the consistency, another good Stowe word, consistent. You know, it's the stabilizing factor in our lives that actually has to do with how the energy, the patterns are tied up in knots. Bucky Fuller used to do this thing on stage where he would have this 20-foot long piece of rope, and the rope was tied in 2-foot sections where there was 2 feet of, let's say, sailor's manila rope, then 2 feet of a yellow nylon rope, and then 2 feet of a blue twine. And each of the different sections were different. And you'd make an overhand knot in it, have 2 people hold the extremes of the rope, and he'd move the knot down the rope and ask people to describe the knot. Oh, it's yellow nylon tied into a knot. It's blue linen tied into a knot. And it's like something changes, and that's the material, but something stays the same. And that's the shape of the knot. And what our charts show absolutely clearly is the shape of our knot. You see, every 7 years in our body, a quarter of a Saturn cycle, the physical substance in our body has basically all cycled out and has been replaced. There's not one cell. Okay, there may be one. I don't really know this, but apparently there's no cells that are in your body today that were there at birth. And yet there's something about Amanda at age 5 and Amanda at age 40 that is somehow the same, but the substance isn't the same. What's the same? It's the hum, which is shown by the shape of the knot. That's Saturn.
This could be opening up Pandora's box, and we've already been on for an hour, but you brought in Saturn and Pluto today, and they're huge players in this year. So
Talk to you next week.
Yes, I know. See, this is going to open up another thing, right? Exactly.
To be continued. But
yeah.
Go ahead.
I mean, but so how does this dialogue of boundaries and limitations and the phoenix rising and perceived limitations of like all of this tie into what's happening now and this year?
It's exactly why we're talking about it.
Right. And what clues, again, I'm always interested in the invitation that the configuration of the knots is bringing to us.
Now, Me too, but let me just interject something here. Do you know how to say the word "not" in Latin? It's easy.
It's going to be
Node,
something so
node,
obvious.
node.
Node. There you
That's
go.
what a node is. A node,
Mm.
whether it's a node in a tumor or whether it's a node in a physics experiment where you're doing high frequency intersection of waves to create standing patterns, or whether you're talking about the moon's orbit and the Earth's orbit around the sun, a node is basically where energy ties itself up into a knot.
Mm.
That's all a node is a knot.
Wow.
Which is what Saturn is, you see, because there is no such thing as physical substance. I appear to be physical, but it's an illusion. Physicality is an illusion of the perception of the range of frequencies that we perceive when light intersects with other light and at 90-degree angles. That's a node at 90-degree angles. And the light frequency slows itself down enough that it impinges on our sensory organs. Again, I always come back to the fact that gamma rays or cosmic rays are so high frequency that they don't just go through you or me like X-rays largely do. They go through the entire Earth without even knowing that there's anything physical there, because physicality is related to the frequency of vibrations, which is why whether it's extraterrestrials or non-physical entities, we think of them as higher frequencies, that we are kind of like a, we're like these slow moving things that they can't even imagine or perceive, which is why communication can be so difficult from one dimension, if you will, to another.
Okay, so can we continue this Saturn Pluto thing next week?
Yes, but can I end with my poem?
Of course. Everyone's looking forward to it. That last time everyone loved your poem.
All right, so this poem has a little bit of an introduction. I first met Bruce Lipton in 1993, and we became like instant blood brothers. I mean, like, just
you guys are so similar. Wow.
And very different. But when I met Bruce, within a few weeks of meeting him, I wrote this poem that a couple of years ago, Bruce sent this poem out to his very, very wide internet list. And he refers to this poem as his Rick Levine poem. I refer to this poem as my Bruce Lipton poem. But it basically has to do with the relationship between the high frequency events that occur at the physical bodily cellular level and the low frequency events that occur at the cosmic level. If anyone is not familiar with Bruce's work, go out and buy a copy of The Biology of Belief. It's one of the most simplest, most accessible, and most important books to read to really understand how we are not based upon the physical aspects of our body. In some ways, Bruce, and maybe Bruce along with Rupert Sheldrake, who coined the term morphogenetic fields, those two biologists really took biology out of the realm of Newtonian cause and effect physics into the realm of quantum physics, kind of like Fritz Capra and other people did with physics back in the 60s and 70s when they wrote books like The Tao of Physics and the Dancing Woolly Masters and certainly Fred Wolf's books and other books. So this is my Bruce Lipton poem, and it has to do with how the sense of self and identity connect with the cosmos. And in some ways, it is my singular and ultimate statement about reincarnation and disincarnation.
Are you going to put the words up like you did last time?
Oh, sure, I can. I wasn't
it's really
going
helpful to be
Yes.
able to read through it. And I just had a vision, Rick.
Oh, this is scary.
I would love to do a panel with you and Bruce Lipton. That would be so much fun.
Well, I certainly can't commit to that boy. He's a busy boy.
We're going to do it.
But but if he would do it for anyone, he probably would for me. So we might make this happen. Yes. Okay. So let me share my screen and get this to a way where okay.
And like last time, we'll have Rick send us the words and we'll post it in the description of this show.
Right. Okay. Share screen, and the name of this poem is Radios, and it goes like this. Planets talk. Their cosmic discourse determines the fate of vulnerable babes, each armed with a few trillion tiny cellular receptors. Each cell with its calibrated microantenna tuned into the emptiness of deep space and infinite time. Planets talk. Their discordant orbital harmonies shout with the power of Wagner, resonate with the intensity of Stravinsky, chant with the mystery of Grieg, orchestrate with the majesty of Tchaikovsky, vibrate with the magic of chanting Kyoto monks. Planets talk. Their spherical vibrations pulsate ultra-low frequencies of life. Electromagnetic waves broadcast unique moments of patterned universality, while mysterious, invisible rays from omnipresent space and time make magic here on Earth. Meanwhile, with naive determination, I carefully disassemble my radio, looking for the music inside. Frustration builds, for I find only pieces of mechanical things. I cannot find even one tiny shred of evidence of the wondrous symphony that moments before came from within this plastic shell, printed circuits of resistors and capacitors, semiconductors and wires. These magical artifacts offer no clues. This electromechanical universe is not a map that points the way to the magic of song. Elsewhere, with the very same determination, scientists dissect animals looking for the source of life and take apart the human mind, searching for the phantom captain, while the obvious truth is staring us in the face. Life is everywhere, and consciousness does not originate within the brain. Plants and animals are bioradios, optimized to receive the broadcasts of life. Our nervous systems are energy transformers. Our electrochemical brains are organic televisions, each playing its own variation of the interplanetary music of the spheres, each playing its unique pattern of cosmic consciousness. When the radio breaks, the broadcast station does not go off the air.
Oh, I love that. Very powerful.
That's it.
I love the way you break it down.
I ain't got any other secrets.
Well, just the origin of the universe itself and how life works. That's it. All right.
But do you see how this poem represents that again, you have a radio, and the mistake is thinking that the music is coming from within the radio.
Right.
The mistake that we make is we think that consciousness is coming from within us. We're the receiver and the broadcaster.
Mm.
Okay.
All right. So good. So good. Thank you so much. And we will post that. You will send it to us, please. And I had another vision as you were reading this. We got to put a book together of your poetry. Just send it. We'll put it together.
Okay. Is this where we tell people about my Instagram and about the course that we're offering later this year?
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
Rick Levine, Astrologer on Instagram. I actually screenshot a post you made the other day, and I thought maybe we could talk about it today, but next time. And his posts are daily. You'll get updates on the energy. So good. Follow Rick there. And
that's Rick. And that's Rick Levine, Astrologer.
Rick Levine, Astrologer. And if you would, and it's also Facebook, Rick.
Yeah, it's also Facebook.
Yeah. If you would like to get on the wait list for the Foundations of Astrology class that we are going to be offering with Rick in September, you can do so now. It's astrologyhub.com/foundations. astrologyhub.com/foundations. Rick is going to be teaching all the fundamental basic building blocks of astrology, and that's going to set you up for the next course, which is going to be Rick's approach to chart reading. So it's this, first preliminary step, planets, signs, houses, aspects, putting it all together, right? And
Yep.
then the next phase of it will be early next year will be the actual chart reading. So
right, and of course, one can spend the better part of one's life, learning astrology. The beauty of this course is for those people who don't want to enroll in a 4-year program today, but instead want a roughly 10 to 15 hours, enough to basically take you to that step of not being overwhelmed when other astrologers are using vocabulary that you don't know what the hell they're talking about.
And it's Rick's approach to astrology. So if you resonate with the way that he practices, with the things that he shares here on the show, then it's going to be a really awesome class for you, whether or not you are new to astrology or you've been studying for a long time.
Or even are professional, because personally, I love listening to other astrologers talk about whether it's a planet, a sign, an aspect, houses, because I'm always learning new things and new ways of framing the archetypes and the symbols from other people's perspectives. That's part of the magic of astrology.
Yeah. Okay. So that's astrologyhub.com/foundations. It's coming in September. If you're on the wait list, you'll be the first to find out about the course once we release it. And we'd love to have you all. Rick, thank you so much. This has been so fun. Like, the word I keep coming up with is fun. It's just like this deep dive and exploration into what the heck's going on here. It's just always fun to do.
I have one quick question to ask before we leave.
Mm-hmm.
What the heck is going on here?
Oh, I have no idea.
me neither.
But it's fun to talk about, and it's fun to explore. And it's really fun to explore with all of you. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for being a part of our community. And thank you, as always, for making astrology a part of your life. I'll catch you on the next episode. Thanks, Rick.